Chapter 6. The first business proposition arrived at 6:47 a.m., 3 days after the retreat incident. Sarah sat in Dominic's penthouse kitchen, nursing her third cup of coffee and scrolling through emails that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or board meeting schedules. Instead, her inbox was flooded with messages from CEOs she'd never heard of, all wanting to discuss mutually beneficial partnerships and exclusive consulting arrangements. "Listen to this one," she called to Dominic, who was pacing the living room while barking orders into his phone about enhanced security protocols. "Alexander Volkov, CEO of Arctic Enterprises, wants to offer me a permanent advisory position, with a signing bonus of $5 million and what he calls comprehensive health and safety benefits." Dominic's conversation paused. What kind of safety benefits? 24/7 protection from his most trusted associates, a secure residential facility in Alaska, and I quote, "complete freedom within the bounds of PAC territory." She looked up from her laptop. "That's prison, right?" "He's describing a very expensive prison." "A very expensive prison," Dominic confirmed grimly. "Alexander Volkov controls most of the northern territories. He's been trying to expand south for decades. And having a healer would help with that expansion? Having a healer would make his PAC virtually unstoppable in territorial conflicts." Sarah scrolled to the next email. "Okay, what about Chun Wei, CEO of Shanghai Moon Industries? He's offering $8 million, a penthouse apartment, and something called cultural exchange opportunities." Chun Wei runs the largest PAC consortium in Asia. The cultural exchange probably involves learning to heal his warriors in between territorial battles. Wonderful. She kept scrolling. "Oh, this one's different. Isabella Santos from Rio wants to discuss women's leadership opportunities in supernatural business development." Dominic's pacing stopped entirely. "Isabella Santos contacted you directly? Is that bad?" "Isabella Santos is the most powerful female alpha in South America. If she's interested in recruiting you, it means she's planning something big." "How big?" "Continental expansion big." Sarah closed her laptop and rubbed her temples. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly. In the 3 days since my healing abilities became public knowledge, I've received job offers from Werewolf CEOs on 4 continents, all of whom want to use me as their personal battlefield medic." "That's an accurate assessment. And none of them are actually offering me jobs. They're offering me gilded cages." Dominic finished his phone call and moved to sit across from her at the kitchen island. In the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the strain of the last few days on his face, the careful control that was costing him more energy than he wanted to admit. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "For all of it. For the abilities you never asked for the attention they're bringing, for the fact that your life has become a supernatural bidding war. And for not telling me you suspected I had abilities from the beginning?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug like it was an anchor. "I knew something was different about you from that first day," he admitted. "The way people responded to you, the calming effect you had in stressful situations. But I didn't know it was healing abilities until you touched Rebecca. You suspected, though. I suspected you had some kind of supernatural lineage. Dormant abilities aren't unheard of." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "But Sarah, I need you to understand. My interest in you was never primarily about what you could do for the PAC." "Primarily?" "At all," he corrected firmly. "You were 4 years old and sunshine personified, and you made me want to be worthy of your trust. Everything I've done since then has been about protecting that little girl who thought cookies belonged in board meetings." Despite everything, the stress, the fear, the constant awareness that she was now the supernatural world's most wanted asset, Sarah felt herself smile. "I still think cookies belong in board meetings. I'll make sure the PAC knows that's non-negotiable." Before she could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but Dominic's expression suggested he knew exactly who it was. "Don't answer it," he said. "Who is it?" "Probably another alpha CEO who thinks he can charm you into voluntary cooperation." As if to prove his point, the phone stopped ringing and immediately buzzed with a voicemail. Then another call came in from a different number. Then another. "This is insane," Sarah said, watching her phone light up with incoming calls. "How did my contact information even get out?" The supernatural business world is smaller than you'd think. And word travels fast when it comes to strategic advantages like healing abilities. Strategic advantages. The phrase sat sourly in her stomach. "Is that what I am?" "You're my mate," Dominic said firmly. "Everything else is secondary." Is it? Because I'm starting to feel less like a person and more like a very valuable commodity. Before Dominic could respond, the penthouse's private elevator chimed, and Patricia Morrison stepped out looking like she'd had about as much sleep as Sarah felt. "We have a problem," Patricia announced without preamble. "Another problem?" Sarah asked. "Because I'm pretty sure we've hit our problem quota for the week. This one's bigger." Patricia moved to the windows, checking the security screens built into the glass. 3 separate PACs have sent representatives to New York in the past 24 hours. They're not here for tourism. "Let me guess," Dominic said, his voice taking on the controlled edge that meant he was preparing for conflict. "They want to make their offers in person. They want to assess the asset directly," Patricia corrected, and the clinical language made Sarah flinch. "Could we maybe not refer to me as the asset?" she asked. "I'm sitting right here." "Sorry." Patricia looked genuinely apologetic. "But that's how they're talking about you, Sarah. Not as a person, but as a strategic resource to be acquired. Through legitimate business channels, or? The offers are getting less diplomatic by the hour." Alexander Volkov's latest message included what can only be described as a territorial challenge. "If Dominic doesn't accept a formal negotiation for your services, within 72 hours, Volkov will consider our PAC's claim invalid." "What does that mean?" "It means," Dominic said grimly, "that they'll try to take you by force." Sarah stared at him, processing the implications. "So my options are basically, go with one of these alpha CEOs voluntarily, or get kidnapped by whichever one has the most aggressive acquisition strategy." "There's a third option," Patricia said carefully. "Which is?" Patricia looked at Dominic, some kind of silent communication passing between them. "The PAC elders want to meet with you," Dominic said finally. "Today?" "The PAC elders?" "The senior advisors who help govern PAC law and territorial disputes. They." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "They have concerns about the current situation." "What kind of concerns?" Another look passed between Patricia and Dominic, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Maybe I should hear this from them directly," she said. The PAC elders met in a conference room that looked like it had been designed for either high-stakes business negotiations or supernatural tribunals. Sarah couldn't decide which was more intimidating, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, or the 3 individuals sitting across from her with expressions that suggested they were evaluating a particularly risky investment. Eleanor Blackthorne, Dominic's great-aunt and the PAC's senior elder, looked like she could have stepped out of a Fortune 500 boardroom. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her suit was impeccably tailored, and her pale blue eyes missed nothing. Thomas Chun, Marcus's grandfather and the PAC's financial advisor, had the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of successful deal-making. He'd built the Chun family fortune from nothing, and it showed in the way he studied Sarah like she was a complex market analysis. The third elder, Margaret Wu, served as the PAC's legal counsel and had a reputation for ruthless efficiency that extended to both courtrooms and territorial disputes. She looked like she could dismantle corporate empires before lunch and still have time for a proper afternoon tea. They were, in short, exactly the kind of people Sarah would have expected to find governing a supernatural business empire. "Miss Knox," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the kind of cultured authority that made board members snap to attention. "Thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me. Though I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure why I'm here." "You're here," Thomas said, "because your presence has created a significant strategic problem for this PAC. I didn't ask for healing abilities." "No," Margaret agreed, "but you have them. And in the supernatural world, abilities like yours are game changers. Literally." Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her pale eyes fixed on Sarah's face. "Tell me, my dear, what do you know about PAC bonds and mate claims?" "The basics, I think. Werewolves mate for life, there's some kind of mystical connection, and Dominic thinks I'm his destined mate." "Thinks?" Thomas's eyebrows rose. "My dear girl, there's no thinking involved. Mate bonds are biological imperatives. When an alpha finds their true mate, the bond is absolute." "Okay, so Dominic knows I'm his destined mate. The question," Margaret said carefully, "is whether you've accepted that bond." Sarah felt like she was walking into a trap, but she wasn't sure what kind. "What do you mean?" "Mate bonds must be claimed and accepted by both parties," Eleanor explained. "Until that happens, the bond exists but isn't official." "Official?" "Recognized by PAC law and supernatural governance. Protected under territorial treaties." Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. An unclaimed mate has no legal standing in pact disputes. The pieces started clicking into place, and Sarah felt ice settle in her stomach. You're saying that because Dominic and I haven't officially mated, I'm not technically protected by pact law. That's exactly what we're saying, Thomas confirmed. Which means that legally you're a free agent. Any pact can make a legitimate claim for your services. My services? Your healing abilities, Eleanor clarified, though her tone suggested she knew exactly how clinical it sounded. So what you're telling me is that I need to officially mate with Dominic, or I'm fair game for every alpha CEO who wants their own personal battlefield medic. That's one option, Margaret said. What's the other option? The three elders exchanged glances, and Sarah realized she really didn't want to hear the answer. The other option, Eleanor said gently, is to neutralize the security risk you represent. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Sarah felt the room grow very, very cold. Neutralize, she repeated slowly. Your abilities make you incredibly valuable, Thomas explained in the tone of someone discussing quarterly projections. But they also make you incredibly dangerous. If another pack were to acquire your loyalty through force or coercion, it could destabilize territorial balances across multiple continents. So you're suggesting that you eliminate me to prevent that from happening. We're suggesting, Margaret said carefully, that the pack's survival might require difficult decisions. Sarah stared at the three elders, these pillars of supernatural society who were discussing her murder like it was a reasonable business strategy, and felt something cold and final settle in her chest. I see, she said quietly. We don't want it to come to that, Eleanor said, and she actually sounded sincere. But we have responsibilities to the pack, to our territorial claims, to the hundreds of werewolves whose safety depends on our decisions. And one unclaimed healer represents too much risk. An unclaimed healer with your level of ability represents an existential threat to pack stability, Thomas confirmed. So my choices are, mate with Dominic officially or die. Your choices, Margaret corrected, are to accept your place in the pack hierarchy through the mate bond, or accept that your continued existence might not be compatible with pack security. Sarah looked around the conference room, at the expensive furniture and the city views, and the three people who were calmly discussing the cost-benefit analysis of her life, and realized that this was what the supernatural world really looked like. Not the romance of destined mates or the adventure of werewolf politics, but the cold calculation of assets and liabilities, strategic advantages and acceptable losses. She was not a person to these people. She was a commodity to be managed. Does Dominic know about this conversation? She asked. Dominic is emotionally compromised, Eleanor said diplomatically. His judgment regarding you is clouded by the mate bond. So you're going behind his back. We're fulfilling our responsibilities as pack elders, Thomas said firmly. Sometimes that means making decisions that individual pack members might not appreciate. Even if that pack member is the alpha. Especially if that pack member is the alpha, Margaret said. Alphas can be replaced. Packs cannot. The casual brutality of that statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. These people would eliminate Dominic too, if they thought it served the pack's interests. I need some time to think about this, she said, standing on legs that felt unsteady. Of course, Eleanor said graciously. But don't take too long. The other packs won't wait indefinitely for a resolution. How long do I have? 72 hours, Thomas said. The same deadline Marcus Steele gave you. After that, the situation becomes unmanageable. Sarah nodded and walked toward the door, trying to maintain her composure until she could get out of the room. But Eleanor's voice stopped her before she reached the exit. Miss Knox? Yes. For what it's worth, I hope you choose to stay. You've made Dominic happier than I've seen him in decades. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. But happiness is a luxury we can't always afford. Sarah left the conference room and walked blindly toward Dominic's penthouse, her mind reeling with the weight of impossible choices. Mate with Dominic officially. Bind herself to him and the pack forever, accepting a life where her value would always be measured by her usefulness. Or refuse, and accept that the pack elders would eliminate her as a security risk. She made it to Dominic's private office before the tears started, sinking into the chair behind his desk and letting herself have a moment to grieve for the normal life she was never going to get back. Through the office windows, she could see the city spread out below. Millions of people going about their ordinary human lives, completely unaware that there was an entire world of supernatural politics playing out around them. She envied them. Her phone buzzed with another message, Probably another alpha CEO making another business proposition that was really a kidnapping threat with better marketing. Instead, it was from Dominic. Emergency pack meeting in conference room A. Need you there in 10 minutes. Sarah stared at the message and realized that her 72 hours might have just gotten significantly shorter. She wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to walk back into a world where she would always be an asset first and a person second. But first, she was going to figure out if there was a third option the elders hadn't mentioned. Because if the supernatural world wanted to treat her like a commodity, she was going to make damn sure she was the most expensive, difficult-to-acquire commodity they'd ever encountered. After all, she'd learned from the best, and Dominic Blackthorne hadn't built his empire by accepting other people's definitions of what was possible. Chapter 7. The formal offer arrived at exactly 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, delivered by courier in a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sarah sat across from Dominic's desk, watching his face grow progressively darker as he read through the documents. Triple market value, he said finally, his voice carefully controlled in a way that made her think of earthquakes building pressure beneath the surface. That's generous, she said, though something in his expression told her generous wasn't the right word. Generous isn't what I'd call it. He slid the portfolio across the desk toward her. Read the conditions. Sarah opened the leather folder and scanned the first few pages of legal documents. It looked like a standard corporate acquisition offer, until she reached Section 7. Personal consulting services, she read aloud. The acquisition includes a mandatory 5-year exclusive consulting contract with Ms. Serafina Knox, to be personally negotiated with Marcus Steele, CEO of Lunar Enterprises. She looked up. He's trying to buy me. He's trying to buy the company and acquire you as part of the package deal. Can he do that? Not legally. You're not company property. Dominic's jaw clenched, though the way he's structured the offer suggests he doesn't see a meaningful distinction. Sarah continued reading, her unease growing with each clause. The consulting contract wasn't just exclusive. It required her to relocate to company facilities in Alaska, submit to comprehensive health and safety protocols, which sounded suspiciously like round-the-clock supervision, and provide specialized services as determined by company leadership. This is a kidnapping contract disguised as corporate paperwork, she said. It's exactly what it is. So we reject it and move on. Dominic was quiet for a moment too long, staring at the offer with an expression she couldn't read. What aren't you telling me? She asked. Before he could answer, Marcus Chun burst through the office doors without knocking, his usually composed demeanor cracked with something that looked like panic. We have a problem, he announced, crossing to Dominic's desk with urgent strides. A big problem. Bigger than Marcus Steele trying to buy the company to acquire Sarah? Much bigger. Marcus set his laptop on the desk and turned the screen toward them. He's been buying shares. Quietly, through shell companies and subsidiary acquisitions. Look at this. The screen showed a complex web of corporate ownership structures, with Lunar Enterprises and its various subsidiaries highlighted in red. He owns 18% of Blackthorne Industries, Marcus continued, split across 47 different holding companies. And as of this morning, he's made acquisition offers to every major shareholder on our books. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What does that mean? It means, Dominic said grimly, that he doesn't need us to accept his buyout offer. If he can acquire 31% of company shares, he can force a hostile takeover. And based on the responses we're seeing to his offers, Marcus added, he'll have that 31% by the end of the week. The office fell silent except for the sound of traffic far below and the quiet hum of the building's ventilation system. Sarah stared at the computer screen, at the red highlights that represented Marcus Steele's systematic acquisition of power over her life. So what are our options? She asked. We fight, Dominic said immediately. We make counteroffers to the shareholders, increase our own market position, find legal challenges to his acquisition strategy. And if that doesn't work, then we prepare for a corporate war that could destabilize supernatural business relationships across 2 continents. Sarah looked between Dominic and Marcus Chun, seeing the determination and worry in their faces, and felt something cold and final settle in her chest. This is about me, she said quietly. All of it. The hostile takeover, the shareholder acquisitions, the potential destabilization of supernatural business relationships. Marcus Steele is willing to risk billions of dollars and international territorial conflicts because he wants access to my healing abilities. Sarah. No, let me finish. She stood up, moving to the windows that overlooked the city. I'm tired of being the prize in other people's chess games. I'm tired of having my value measured by what I can do for supernatural politics. And I'm especially tired of watching people I care about prepare for war because someone else has decided they want to own me. You're not property, Dominic said firmly. No matter what Marcus Steele thinks, you're not something that can be bought or sold. Aren't I? She turned to face him. Because that's exactly how everyone treats me. The pack elders want me officially mated to secure their investment. Marcus Steele wants to acquire me through corporate channels. Even you, she paused, the word sticking in her throat. Even I what? Even you talked about my healing abilities making me more precious, not more useful. But isn't that the same thing? Aren't I valuable to everyone because of what I can provide? The silence that followed was painful, and Sarah realized she'd hit closer to the truth than anyone wanted to admit. I love you, Dominic said quietly, because of who you are, not because of what you can do. Do you? Or do you love the idea of me? The perfect mate who can heal your pack and secure your territorial position and make you look magnanimous for protecting a human. That's not, isn't it? She moved back to his desk, placing her hands flat on the surface. Tell me honestly, Dominic, if I didn't have healing abilities, would you have spent 14 years watching over me? Would you have offered me a job when my mother died? Would any of this have happened? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again, and she saw the truth in his hesitation. I thought so, she said softly. Sarah, Marcus Chin said carefully, I think you're letting stress cloud your judgment. None of us see you as just an asset. Don't you? Then why are we sitting here talking about hostile takeovers and corporate warfare instead of finding a way for me to live my own life on my own terms? Because the supernatural world doesn't work that way, Dominic said, frustration bleeding into his voice. Because there are rules and hierarchies in territorial politics that have existed for centuries. Because you can't just opt out of being what you are. Can I? Before either of them could answer, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about the timing made her answer it anyway. Serafina Knox. Ms. Knox, this is Jonathan Pierce from Pierce & Associates. I represent the Blackthorn Industries shareholder consortium. Sarah put the call on speaker, watching Dominic's expression shift to something predatory. What can I do for you, Mr. Pierce? I'm calling to inform you that as of this morning, my clients control 32% of Blackthorn Industries stock. We're prepared to vote in favor of the Lunar Enterprises acquisition proposal. Congratulations, Sarah said dryly. I assume there's a point to this call. The point, Ms. Knox, is that Mr. Steele would like to arrange a personal meeting to discuss the terms of your consulting contract. He's prepared to be very generous. How generous? $10 million signing bonus, in addition to the relocation and safety benefits outlined in the original proposal. Sarah met Dominic's eyes across the desk and saw fury and helplessness warring in his expression. That's a very generous offer, she said calmly. Tell Mr. Steele I'll consider it. Sarah, Dominic warned. Actually, she continued, ignoring Dominic's sharp look, tell Mr. Steele that I have a counterproposal. One that might be more mutually beneficial than his current strategy. I'm listening. I'll meet with him personally to discuss terms. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., neutral location. But I want to see the full acquisition documents first, including the complete corporate structure analysis that allowed him to acquire 32% of Blackthorn Industries stock. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's highly confidential information. Then I suppose he'll have to decide how badly he wants this meeting. Another pause. I'll convey your message. You do that. Sarah hung up and looked at Dominic and Marcus, both of whom were staring at her like she'd lost her mind. What the hell was that? Dominic demanded. That was me taking control of my own situation. By agreeing to meet with Marcus Steele? Are you insane? By getting access to the information, I need to find a third option. She moved to Marcus Chen's laptop, studying the corporate ownership web on the screen. You said Marcus Steele owns 32% of Blackthorn Industries through various shell companies and acquisitions. Yes. And Dominic, how much of the company do you personally own? 41%. Family Trust holds another 12%. So between the two of you, you control 53% of company stock. That's not how hostile takeovers work, Marcus Chin said carefully. The family trust shares can be challenged under certain circumstances, and... What if it wasn't a hostile takeover? Sarah interrupted. What if it was a merger? Both men stared at her. A merger? Think about it. Marcus Steele wants access to my healing abilities. Dominic wants to protect me and his pack. The supernatural community is watching to see how this power struggle plays out. She moved to the whiteboard on the far wall, picking up a marker. What if we gave them all what they want, but on my terms? I'm not following, Dominic said. Sarah began drawing corporate structure diagrams on the whiteboard, the business degree she'd never expected to use finally proving its worth. Blackthorn Industries and Lunar Enterprises merged to form a new entity, she said, sketching out the structure. Equal partnership, shared resources, combined supernatural business network spanning North America. Marcus Steele would never agree to an equal partnership, Marcus Chen protested. He would if the alternative was losing everything. Sarah drew arrows connecting the two companies. Because here's what he doesn't know. Hostile takeovers require regulatory approval for companies this size. And supernatural businesses fall under both human corporate law and council jurisdiction. The council has to approve major territorial mergers, Dominic said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his expression. Exactly. And the council is very interested in maintaining stable territorial boundaries. A hostile takeover that results in one pack controlling supernatural business interests across multiple territories. She shook her head. They'll block it to prevent destabilization. But a voluntary merger between equal partners gets approved as long as it doesn't threaten existing territorial balances. Sarah turned back to the whiteboard, adding more details to her diagram. Which brings me to the best part of this plan. There's more. Who do you think should run this new merged company? Marcus Chen's eyes widened as he realized where she was going with this. You want to put yourself in charge. I want to put the person both alphas are fighting over in a position where she controls the assets they're fighting for. Sarah capped the marker and faced them. I become CEO of the new company. Both packs get access to my healing abilities, but only through legitimate business channels and with my consent. Marcus Steele gets his strategic advantage, Dominic keeps his territorial claims, and I get to stop being treated like a commodity. The silence that followed was deafening. That's... Dominic started. Brilliant, Marcus Chen finished. Completely insane, but brilliant. It would never work, Dominic said. You don't have the experience to run a company that size. I have 2 business degrees, 3 years of executive assistant experience, and intimate knowledge of both companies' operations. Sarah crossed her arms. Plus, I have something neither of you have. I'm not emotionally invested in the territorial pissing contest that's driving this entire conflict. Marcus Steele will never agree to report to you. Marcus Steele will agree to whatever keeps him from losing his entire investment in this acquisition strategy. Because if the council blocks his takeover and his shareholders realize he spent billions on a failed gambit, Lunar Enterprises will be vulnerable to its own hostile takeovers. Dominic stared at the diagrams on the whiteboard, his expression cycling through skepticism, consideration, and something that might have been admiration. You realize, he said finally, that if this works, you'll be running one of the largest supernatural business empires in North America. I realize that if this works, I'll finally have some control over my own life. And if it doesn't work? Sarah looked at the corporate ownership web on Marcus Chen's laptop screen, at the red highlights that represented Marcus Steele's systematic acquisition of power over her future. If it doesn't work, I'm back to being a prize in someone else's chess game, she said. At least this way I get to play a few moves of my own. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Knox, Mr. Steele agrees to tomorrow's meeting. Full documentation will be provided as requested. Looking forward to productive negotiations. J. Pierce. Well, she said, showing them the message. Looks like I'm about to find out how good I am at corporate chess. Dominic was still staring at the whiteboard, at her carefully drawn diagrams that represented a complete restructuring of supernatural business power in North America. You know, he said quietly, when you were 4 years old and reorganized my quarterly reports by color, I thought you had potential. Just potential? I was wrong. His eyes met hers, and she saw something in them that looked like pride mixed with terror. I think you're about to become the most dangerous person in the supernatural world. Good, Sarah said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. It's about time. Because tomorrow, she wasn't going to that meeting as Marcus Steele's potential acquisition or Dominic's mate or the supernatural world's most valuable asset. She was going as Serafina Knox, future CEO, and she had some very interesting proposals to make. Chapter 8. The Blackthorn Industries boardroom had never seen anything quite like this. At the head of the massive mahogany table, Sarah sat with a confidence that would have impressed her business school professors, flanked by stacks of legal documents and financial projections that represented months of work condensed into 48 hours of intensive preparation. To her right, Dominic looked like he was barely restraining himself from shifting into protective alpha mode. To her left, Marcus Steele studied her with the calculating gaze of a predator who'd just realized his prey might actually be another predator. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the kind of boardroom authority that came from knowing you held all the cards, "thank you for accepting my counterproposal meeting." "Your counterproposal," Marcus repeated, his tone suggesting he found the concept amusing. "I'm curious to see what a human executive assistant thinks she can offer that would interest two alpha CEOs. "Former executive assistant," Sarah corrected smoothly. "As of this morning, I'm the interim CEO of Knox Holdings, a new entity that, as you'll see in your packets, has some very interesting assets." She gestured to the folders Patricia had placed in front of each man. Marcus opened his immediately, his expression shifting from amused condescension to sharp attention as he scanned the first few pages. "You incorporated a holding company," he said. "I incorporated a holding company that, through some creative interpretation of corporate law and supernatural regulations, now controls the key asset both of your companies have been fighting over." Dominic looked up from his folder, understanding dawning in his expression. "You incorporated yourself." "I incorporated my healing abilities as proprietary intellectual property, with Knox Holdings as the exclusive licensing entity." Sarah pulled up a presentation on the room's main screen. "Gentlemen, welcome to the future of supernatural healthcare." The first slide showed a corporate structure that was both elegant and ruthless in its simplicity. Knox Holdings sat at the center, with licensing agreements extending to medical facilities, PAC territories, and corporate entities across multiple continents. "This is impossible," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is innovative," Sarah corrected, "and completely legal under both human corporate law and supernatural regulations. I've spent the last 2 days consulting with lawyers in 4 different jurisdictions, and the consensus is clear. Supernatural abilities can be legally classified as proprietary assets if the holder chooses to commercialize them through legitimate business channels." She clicked to the next slide, which showed projected revenues that made both men sit up straighter. "The supernatural healthcare market is completely underserved," she continued. "Werewolves rely on natural healing for minor injuries and accept permanent damage or death for major trauma. Other supernatural species have similar gaps in medical care. But with proper organization and strategic partnerships, healing abilities like mine could revolutionize supernatural medicine." "And make you incredibly wealthy in the process," Marcus observed. "And make my business partners incredibly wealthy in the process," Sarah corrected. "Which brings me to why you're both here." She clicked to a slide showing 2 potential partnership structures, one labeled Lunar Enterprises Collaboration and the other Blackthorn Industries Integration. "I'm prepared to offer exclusive licensing agreements to one of your companies," she said. "The partner I choose will have access to supernatural healing services for their PAC members, competitive advantages in territorial disputes, and entry into what could become the most lucrative medical market in the supernatural world." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the building's climate control system. Both alphas stared at the presentation with the focused attention of predators, recognizing a worthy opponent. "What are your terms?" Dominic asked quietly. "Complete autonomy over how my abilities are used. Final approval over all medical cases. Equal partnership status in all business decisions related to supernatural healthcare development." She looked between them. "And absolute protection from any supernatural entity that might consider my abilities more valuable than my consent." "Reasonable terms," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he found them anything but. "What's the selection process?" "I'm glad you asked." Sarah clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline extending over the next 6 months. "You're both going to present comprehensive business plans for supernatural integration into human society. Not just healthcare, but education, employment, legal protections, social services. Whoever can demonstrate the most innovative, ethical, and sustainable approach to supernatural human cooperation wins the partnership." "You're asking us to compete for your favor," Marcus said, and there was something dangerous in his voice. "I'm asking you to compete for my business partnership," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Because this feels very much like you're trying to manipulate two alpha werewolves into playing games for your entertainment. What this feels like, Dominic said, his own voice taking on a warning edge, is someone finally giving Sarah the respect and autonomy she deserves. Respect? Marcus's laugh was not pleasant. She's a human with useful abilities who's gotten ideas above her station. This charade ends now. He began to shift, his form taking on the predatory grace that marked the transition between human and wolf, and Sarah felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Marcus Steele, she said, her voice cutting through the supernatural tension like a blade. If you shift in my boardroom, you'll be in violation of the supernatural business conduct codes that govern territorial disputes in corporate settings. Marcus froze mid-transformation, his golden eyes fixed on her face. Furthermore, she continued, pulling out a thick legal document, any attempt to resolve this business disagreement through physical intimidation or traditional combat challenges will result in the immediate termination of all potential partnership agreements and the activation of protective clauses I've negotiated with the Supernatural Business Council. The Supernatural Business Council doesn't have jurisdiction over mate claims, Marcus growled. They do have jurisdiction over corporate harassment of licensed supernatural service providers, Sarah replied smoothly. Which is what I am now, legally speaking. She stood, moving to the windows that overlooked the city, and for a moment the boardroom was silent except for the distant sounds of traffic far below. You want to know what this really is? She said, turning back to face both men. This is me refusing to be treated like a prize in someone else's chess game. This is me taking control of my own value and my own future. And this is me giving both of you the chance to prove that you see me as something more than a useful asset. Sarah, Dominic said quietly, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Her voice was firm with conviction. Because if I don't establish my own autonomy now, I'll spend the rest of my life being fought over, protected, managed, and controlled by people who think they know what's best for me. She moved back to the table, placing her hands flat on the surface in a gesture that reminded her of that first day in this boardroom, when she'd been 4 years old and convinced that cookies belonged in business meetings. I'm not asking you to compete for ownership of me, she said. I'm asking you to compete for partnership with me, to prove that you can see me as an equal rather than an acquisition. Marcus had shifted back to fully human form, but his expression remained predatory. And if we refuse to play your games? Then Knox Holdings seeks partnerships with other supernatural business entities. The European Werewolf Consortium has expressed interest, as have several of the Asian Pac networks. She shrugged. Your choice. The silence that followed was charged with supernatural tension, but it was Dominic who broke it. What kind of timeline are we talking about? He asked. 6 months for full proposals. 3 months for preliminary presentations. Sarah clicked to the final slide of her presentation. But I'll need interim arrangements while you're preparing your pitches. What kind of interim arrangements? Medical consulting for both companies on a trial basis. Limited healing services for emergency situations. And, she paused, meeting Dominic's eyes, personal security arrangements that don't require me to give up my independence. You want to date both of us? Marcus asked, his eyebrows rising. I want to evaluate both potential partnerships without supernatural politics or alpha posturing getting in the way. She looked between them. Think of it as an extended interview process. Extended interview process, Dominic repeated, and there was something in his voice that might have been amusement. With very high stakes, Marcus added. The highest, Sarah agreed. Because whoever wins this competition doesn't just get a business partner. They get someone who's planning to revolutionize supernatural society through strategic capitalism and excellent employee benefits packages. Despite everything, the tension, the supernatural politics, the billion-dollar stakes, Dominic started laughing. You want to revolutionize werewolf society through hostile takeovers and comprehensive health insurance, he said. Among other things, I've got plans for supernatural educational funding, anti-discrimination legal services, and a supernatural small business development program. She grinned. Turns out there are a lot of gaps in supernatural social services that could be addressed through creative corporate structuring. And you think you can accomplish all of this through business partnerships? I think I can accomplish all of this through business partnerships with forward-thinking alpha CEOs who understand that the future of supernatural society depends on successful integration with human systems. She looked directly at Marcus. The question is whether either of you are actually forward-thinking enough to be that partner. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through frustration, calculation, and what might have been grudging respect. "You realize," he said finally, "that you've just made yourself the most powerful person in this room. I've made myself an equal participant in negotiations that concern my own future," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" But this time, Marcus's tone held genuine curiosity rather than challenge. "Very well, Miss Knox. You want competing business proposals? You'll have them." He gathered his papers and stood to leave, pausing at the boardroom door. "But understand this," he said, his voice carrying supernatural authority. "I don't lose business competitions. Ever." "Neither do I," Dominic said quietly once Marcus had gone. Sarah looked at the man who'd spent 18 years protecting her, who'd given her heated bathroom floors and hazard pay, and the first job that made her feel valued for her intelligence rather than her abilities. "This isn't about winning or losing," she said. "This is about building something better. What if I can't give you what you're looking for? What if you can?" She moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "What if instead of trying to protect me from the supernatural world, you helped me change it?" "Change it how?" "By proving that humans and werewolves can be partners instead of assets and owners. By showing that supernatural abilities can be used to help rather than dominate. By building a business empire that actually makes the world better instead of just making us richer." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. "You know," he said finally, "when you were 4 years old and told me that cookies belonged in business meetings, I thought you were just adorable. And now I think you might actually be able to change the world." His hands came up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "And I want to help you do it, even if it means treating me as an equal partner instead of a protected mate. Especially if it means that." When he kissed her this time, it wasn't the desperate claiming of an alpha protecting his territory. It was the promise of a partner who understood that the best relationships were built on mutual respect and shared dreams. And if somewhere in the distance, the supernatural business world was already buzzing with rumors about the human-born healer who'd just revolutionized corporate werewolf politics, well, that was just the beginning. After all, Sarah had big plans for the future of supernatural society. And excellent health insurance was just the start. 6 months later, the mating ceremony that doubled as a corporate merger announcement would be covered by both Forbes and Supernatural Business Weekly. The headline in both publications was the same: Knox Blackthorn Holdings, the first human-born Luna to run a supernatural business empire. The article went on to detail how the new company had revolutionized supernatural healthcare, established the first werewolf anti-discrimination legal fund, and launched a series of hostile takeovers targeting supernatural organizations with questionable ethics. But the most telling quote came from the new CEO herself. "Turns out the best way to change an unfair system is to buy it out and restructure it with better employee benefits and a zero-tolerance policy for treating people like commodities." Marcus Steele's competing proposal had been impressive, but ultimately lost out to Dominic's presentation, which focused entirely on supporting Sarah's vision for supernatural human integration rather than on what her abilities could do for his pack. As one supernatural business analyst noted, Blackthorn didn't win by being the strongest alpha. He won by being the first alpha to realize that the future of supernatural business belongs to partners, not possessors. The new company's first quarterly report would show record profits, a 0% employee turnover rate, and waiting lists for their supernatural healthcare services that stretched across 3 continents. Not bad for a girl who'd started out looking for cookies in corporate boardrooms. Epilogue: 5 years later. The annual Knox Blackthorn Holdings board meeting was unlike any corporate gathering in supernatural business history. For starters, there were cookies. Sarah had insisted on that from the very first meeting, and now it was company policy that all major corporate events included what the official memos called enhanced refreshment protocols, but what everyone else recognized as the CEO's unwavering belief that important discussions went better with chocolate chip cookies. She stood at the head of the gleaming conference table, 5 months pregnant and absolutely radiant with the kind of confidence that came from having revolutionized an entire society through strategic capitalism and excellent employee benefits. Behind her, a presentation screen showed growth charts that would have made her business school professors weep with pride. "Revenue is up 43% from last quarter," she announced to the room full of supernatural business leaders, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built the most successful supernatural human integration company in North America. Our supernatural healthcare division is now operating in 12 countries, with waiting lists that extend 6 months in advance. Applause filled the room, and Sarah couldn't help but smile at the faces around the table. The Knox Blackthorn Holdings Board of Directors looked like a United Nations meeting for mythical creatures. Werewolves, vampires, fae, and even a few humans who'd proven themselves valuable allies in the company's mission. The legal advocacy program has successfully defended supernatural citizens in over 300 discrimination cases this year, she continued, clicking to the next slide. And our Small Business Development Fund has provided startup capital to supernatural entrepreneurs in 47 states. More applause, and Sarah felt the familiar warmth that came from knowing she was making a real difference in the world. But the achievement I'm most proud of, she said, her hand moving unconsciously to her growing belly, is our family support initiatives. The presentation shifted to show photos from company-sponsored events, packed gatherings that included human spouses, supernatural adoption services, mixed-species daycare centers, and educational programs that helped supernatural children navigate both human schools and their inherited abilities. This year, we've helped 237 supernatural families successfully integrate into human communities, Sarah said. We've provided legal support for mixed-species marriages, educational resources for supernatural children in human schools, and employment assistance for werewolves, vampires, and fae entering the traditional workforce. From his seat to her right, Dominic watched his wife, his mate, his business partner, and the most formidable CEO in the supernatural world, with an expression of pure adoration. 5 years of marriage had only deepened his appreciation for the woman who'd walked into his boardroom as a 4-year-old looking for cookies, and had somehow ended up changing the fundamental structure of supernatural society. Questions? Sarah asked, and immediately several hands went up. Rebecca Liu, now the company's chief operating officer, raised her hand first. What's the status of the European expansion? Ahead of schedule. We're opening offices in London, Paris, and Berlin next quarter, with full supernatural healthcare services available by the end of the year. Sarah grinned. The European Werewolf Consortium has been very cooperative, especially after we helped them negotiate better territorial agreements with the vampire covens. Marcus Chun, who'd been promoted to chief financial officer after proving that his analytical skills worked just as well with supernatural economics, spoke up next. And the Asia-Pacific partnerships? Thriving. The Dragon clans in particular have been enthusiastic about our conflict resolution services. Apparently, having a neutral healer available makes territorial negotiations much more civilized. Patricia Morrison, now the company's chief legal counsel, leaned forward. What about the government contracts? The Department of Supernatural Affairs has officially recognized Knox Blackthorn Holdings as the primary consulting entity for supernatural human integration policies, Sarah said, unable to hide her satisfaction. We're now advising on everything from employment law to educational standards. And the International Supernatural Council? Asked Dr. Sarah Kim, the company's head of medical research and the first human doctor to specialize in supernatural healthcare. They've agreed to adopt our healthcare protocols as the standard for supernatural medical care worldwide, Sarah announced, and the room erupted in celebration. It had taken 5 years, but they'd done it. They'd transformed supernatural society from a collection of secretive, often hostile territories into an integrated network of communities that worked with human society instead of hiding from it. Now, Sarah said once the applause died down, I have some personal news to share. The room went quiet, and she felt Dominic's hand slip into hers, warm and steady and infinitely reassuring. As you all know, Dominic and I are expecting our first child in 4 months, she said, her voice soft with joy. What you don't know is that our little one is already showing signs of being something special. She clicked to a new slide that showed ultrasound images alongside medical charts that would have been incomprehensible to human doctors, but made perfect sense to supernatural healthcare providers. Our daughter appears to have inherited both her father's werewolf genetics and my healing abilities, Sarah explained. Dr. Kim believes she may be the first documented case of a werewolf healer hybrid. The silence that followed was filled with wonder and possibility. What does that mean for her? Rebecca asked softly. It means, Dominic said, speaking for the first time during the meeting, that she's going to grow up in a world where supernatural abilities are seen as gifts to be shared rather than weapons to be hoarded. It means, Sarah added, that she'll never have to choose between being human and being supernatural because her parents helped create a world where those identities can coexist. Dr. Kim raised her hand. Have you considered the implications for supernatural genetics research? A werewolf healer hybrid could provide insights that revolutionize our understanding of inherited abilities. We've considered it, Sarah said firmly, and we've decided that our daughter gets to choose how her abilities are used when she's old enough to make that decision. She'll never be studied, tested, or treated as a research subject without her explicit consent. And until then, Patricia asked, until then, she'll be protected by the same legal frameworks we've established for all supernatural children, Dominic said. Full rights, full protections, and full autonomy over her own abilities. Sarah squeezed his hand, grateful once again for the man who'd learned to see strength in partnership rather than possession. Speaking of protections, she said, I think now would be a good time to address the elephant in the room. She clicked to a new slide showing a corporate acquisition report that made several board members sit up straighter. 3 months ago, Marcus Steele made another attempt to acquire controlling interest in our company, she announced. This time through a subsidiary of Lunar Enterprises called Northern Medical Holdings. A few uncomfortable murmurs went around the table. Marcus Steele had never quite gotten over losing the competition for Sarah's partnership, though his attempts to acquire her company had become less hostile and more creative over the years. I'm pleased to announce that as of yesterday, Knox Blackthorn Holdings completed a counter-acquisition of Northern Medical Holdings, effectively absorbing Marcus Steele's latest attempt at corporate subterfuge into our own operation. The room erupted in laughter and applause. Does this mean Marcus Steele now works for us? Rebecca asked, grinning. It means Marcus Steele now has a choice, Sarah said. He can either accept a position as Senior Vice President of Territorial Relations, a role that would allow him to use his considerable skills for constructive purposes, or he can continue trying to outmaneuver us and watch his business empire get systematically absorbed into ours. And if he chooses option 2? Then he'll discover that I've gotten very good at hostile takeovers over the past 5 years, Sarah said with a smile that would have made her business school professors proud and her enemies nervous. From the back of the room, a familiar voice spoke up. I choose option 1. Everyone turned to see Marcus Steele himself standing in the doorway, looking significantly less predatory and significantly more tired than he had 5 years ago. His expensive suit was as perfectly tailored as ever, but there was something different in his posture. A weariness that came from fighting battles he couldn't win. Marcus, Sarah said calmly. I wasn't expecting you. I wasn't expecting to be systematically outmaneuvered by someone who used to organize filing cabinets by color, Marcus replied, moving into the room with the careful dignity of a man acknowledging defeat. But here we are. Here we are, Sarah agreed. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Marcus looked around the room, taking in the faces of supernatural business leaders who'd once competed with him for territorial dominance and were now working together to build something better. I want to stop fighting a war I can't win, he said finally, and start contributing to something that might actually matter. The position comes with conditions, Dominic warned, though his tone was more cautious than hostile. I expected it would. Full transparency in all business dealings, Sarah said, ticking off requirements on her fingers. Complete integration with our supernatural human cooperation protocols. Zero tolerance for treating supernatural abilities as commodities. And mandatory participation in our conflict resolution training program. And you report to Rebecca as your direct supervisor, with quarterly performance reviews based on how well you collaborate rather than how effectively you dominate. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could practically see him weighing pride against practicality. What's the compensation package? He asked finally. Generous enough to maintain your current lifestyle, with performance bonuses tied to successful territorial integration projects, Patricia said, sliding a contract across the table. Plus full supernatural healthcare benefits, which, given our recent expansion, are the best in the industry. And my PAC. Your PAC members are welcome to apply for positions throughout our organization, Sarah said. We've found that former competitors often make excellent collaborators once they adjust to our corporate culture. Marcus picked up the contract and scanned the first few pages, his expression shifting from resignation to genuine interest. You're offering me a chance to rebuild my entire business model, he said. We're offering you a chance to be part of something bigger than territorial disputes and supernatural politics, Sarah corrected. The question is whether you're interested. Marcus looked up from the contract to meet her eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't see calculation or predatory ambition in his expression. She saw exhaustion and maybe, just maybe, hope. "Where do I sign?" he asked. The celebration that followed the board meeting spilled out onto the terrace of the Knox Blackthorn Holdings headquarters, where the setting sun painted the city in shades of gold and amber. Sarah stood at the railing, one hand on her growing belly, and the other wrapped around a mug of decaffeinated coffee that tasted significantly better than it had any right to. "Penny for your thoughts?" Dominic asked, joining her at the railing. "Just thinking about how different everything is from 5 years ago," she said, leaning into his warmth. "Remember when my biggest concern was whether I could afford to pay for Mom's funeral? I remember thinking you were going to run screaming when you found out werewolves were real," Dominic said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I remember thinking you were having some kind of stress-related breakdown when I saw your golden eyes and fangs. And now I'm married to the most powerful alpha in North America, running the largest supernatural business empire in the world, and pregnant with what might be the first werewolf-healer hybrid in recorded history." She laughed softly. "My life got really weird. Do you regret it?" Sarah turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd spent 18 years loving her from a distance, and the last 5 years proving that the best partnerships were built on equality and mutual respect. "I regret that Mom didn't get to see this," she said honestly. "I regret that it took a hostile takeover attempt for me to realize I had more power than I thought. And I regret that it took 5 years for Marcus Steele to figure out that cooperation works better than competition. But I don't regret falling in love with a werewolf CEO who remembered that a 4-year-old liked cookies in her business meetings. I don't regret discovering I had healing abilities that could help people. And I definitely don't regret building a company that's made the world a better place for supernatural families. Even though it meant giving up any chance at a normal life?" "Dominic Blackthorn," Sarah said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands, "I was never going to have a normal life. I was always going to be the girl who reorganized important documents by color and thought cookies belonged in corporate boardrooms. The only question was whether I was going to use that weirdness for something worthwhile. And have you? Ask me again in 20 years, when our daughter is old enough to decide whether the world we built is worth inheriting." Dominic kissed her then, soft and sweet, and full of promises about the future they were building together. Around them, the sounds of celebration continued as their friends and colleagues and former enemies toasted the success of a company that had started as a hostile takeover defense and had somehow become a force for positive change in the supernatural world. "You know," Sarah said when they broke apart, "there's one thing that still bothers me about that first day we met." "What's that?" "You never did get cookies for that board meeting. I had to settle for whatever was in the vending machine." Dominic laughed, the sound warm and rich and full of love for the woman who'd turned his carefully controlled world upside down in the best possible way. "I'll make sure there are cookies at every board meeting for the rest of our lives," he promised. "Even the hostile takeover meetings?" "Especially the hostile takeover meetings." As the sun set over the city they'd helped transform from a supernatural battleground into a model of integration and cooperation, Sarah Knox Blackthorn, former executive assistant, current CEO, future mother, and the woman who'd revolutionized werewolf society through excellent employee benefits and strategic capitalism, smiled and began planning the next phase of their impossible, wonderful, absolutely perfect life. After all, she had a daughter to prepare for, a company to run, and a husband who'd finally learned that the best way to love someone was to help them become everything they were meant to be. And there would always be cookies in the boardroom. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share, and subscribe for more.